Hi. We're continuing in John Wenham's book, The Goodness of God, and we're discussing the difference between the Old and the New Testament. In this segment, we're talking about, are there two standards when it comes to marriage and divorce? And do they oppose each other in the Old Testament and the New Testament? Here's what Wenham says. The same divine standard of the moral law is to be found implicit in the Old Testament and explicit in the New. The divine purpose was that a man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, so that the two should become one flesh. The complementary nature of man and woman is taught unforgettably in the account of Eve's creation, and the expression one flesh vividly describes the divine ideal for marriage, which can be fulfilled only in monogamy. But the fall laid its defiling hand on sex, as it did on every other relationship. Marriage brought subjection, and birth brought pain. In a few generations there was bigamy, and at least by the time of Abraham, polygamy was firmly established. The evils of polygamy are shown up unmistakably in the domestic unhappiness of one leading figure after another: Abraham, Jacob, David, Solomon. I think sometimes we read these things and don't see the lesson that's being taught, that the messes are the lesson, that they had gone contrary to the ideal of God. I'm going to read to you Jesus talking about marriage and divorce to the religious leaders of his day in Matthew 19, verses 3 to 9. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." "Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery." So he quotes from Genesis about the original ideal of marriage. Then Wenham gives you a summary of the Old Testament teaching on divorce. The Old Testament regulations for divorce were similarly adapted to the needs of the time. In days when women's rights were few and their hopes of redress were slender, the Mosaic legislation was a powerful buttress against masculine cruelty and infidelity. No man could dismiss his wife on the basis of some passing whim. He needed to have just ground for divorcing her, and he needed to draw up a proper document as a bill of divorcement, so that her rights were safeguarded if she married again. Divorce was the evil result of evil hearts, but it would have been unrealistic to have forbidden it altogether, as long as hearts remained evil. Because of the hardness of their hearts, Jesus said, divorce had been allowed, and he himself continued to allow it, it seems, on the grounds of unchastity. But it was divorce that was humane and carefully regulated. Then there's a paragraph here about its connection with marriage, but it was women of prisoners of war, women prisoners of war. It reads, the directions for the treatment of women prisoners of war have sometimes been criticized. Yet, in a hard-hearted and lustful world, they are in fact remarkably exacting and humane. For the Israelite soldier in a conquering army, there was to be no rape. If he desired a beautiful woman, he was to take her to his own home and allow her a month to prepare for marriage. There was no question of her becoming a slave concubine. If at the end of the time he desired marriage, he was to take her as his legal wife. Should he subsequently cease to take delight in her, he might not sell her or treat her as a slave. He was to let her go where she liked. In a world where there are wars and therefore prisoners of war, such regulations in fact set a high standard of conduct. Now I think when we read some things, like the passage about prisoners of war, women, that by the way is in Deuteronomy 21, from verse 10 onwards, you can read the description in Scripture. But I think sometimes when we plonk ourselves in a period of history, we don't do what we should do. Take into consideration the time, place, the code of the time, what was happening in the world at the time. All those things have to be taken into account when we make our assessment. We can't base it on the way things are now or the code that we live under in the place that we live at. Even in different places in the world now, there are different standards that people live by. Those should be taken into account when we're looking at these things. When Max was little, I was going to tell you, when Max was little, he used to like to read books that were time travel books. And they would oftentimes, by some kind of magic in the book, get you to travel in time and go back to different periods of history in different locations. And always the life that they encountered seemed very strange to them, and the habits and the behavior of the people was strange because they were in a different time. So we might take a lesson from that ourselves. Wenham continues with this comment. He says, the laws of the Old Testament are framed in a world where force, both physical and psychological, play a tremendous part, whether for good or ill. And one of the primary purposes of Old Testament law is to defend the weak in this world of force. Rejection of all force is the recipe first for anarchy and then for tyranny, since in the end anarchy is even more terrifying than tyranny and will not long be tolerated by any community. So the Old Testament God was interested in protecting people, and so his law was designed to teach them how to protect people in the world that they were living in. I'm going to connect as a link at the end of this video two of the videos we did about marriage and Yahweh as the example of a covenant keeper with his relationship with the nation of Israel. So the first one is called Yahweh's Everlasting Love versus J.W. Org Conditional Contrast. And the second one is Yahweh's marriage to Israel, model of covenant faithfulness. The next time we're going to talk about crime and punishment in the Old Testament.